Welcome to Amplifying Voices, NC2ML's We All Speak Math podcast, where we take a deep dive into the power of dialogue and mathematics education. I'm Josh Griffin.
And I'm Emily Hare.
Hi, I'm Margaret Borden. This podcast is part of the statewide We All Speak Math campaign from the North Carolina Collaborative for Mathematics Learning, dedicated to enhancing student discourse in the classroom. And with us today is Dr. Cyndi Edgington and Dr. Allison McCulloch.
In today's episode, we focus on supporting early career teachers. But honestly, I think it's helpful for anyone collaborating with teachers working on increasing math discourse. I, for one, while listening to Cyndi and Allison today, made some connections I hadn't thought of before around designing PL for the moves around the Launch, Explore, Discuss model that I thought were cool and how that might impact kind of the order in which you roll out the moves.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. That was really good. And I love Cyndi. She's great. But my favorite thing about this episode is Allison McCulloch. I know I'm extremely biased, and I've had this episode circled for a while because of how long I've known Allison. But out of all the people that have mentored me throughout my educational career, she's definitely in the top 4 of the most impactful people. And I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for her. So every time I talk to her, I always learn something new, and today was no exception. So for those listeners, the resources that we share on this episode, that list is going to be massive. I don't even know how we're going to fit it all in the description.
Yeah, I think both of them have a lot of experience supporting teachers in North Carolina, both pre-service and in service through like NC2ML work. So I just really valued the expertise of both of them.
I couldn't agree more. They are fantastic humans and have some fantastic things to say. So it was really fun to listen to them and learn more. And I've also been mentored by them, for both of them, for a long time. And again, I agree with Josh. I've learned so much. My favorite part personally was when Allison shared an amazing description of how to group the discourse moves together. The reasoning behind the order that she likes to present them was so well thought out, and the attention that she brings to assigning competence was really cool to hear about. It also comes as no surprise that her thoughtfulness behind her organization is reflected in the way that the discourse moves have been presented in our campaign and in our podcast. So it's exciting to look behind the curtain and see some of that reasoning that goes into all of this.
Well, you are in for an enriching discussion. So without further ado, let's dive into today's episode of Amplifying Voices, NC2ML's We All Speak Math podcast.
Welcome to the We All Speak Math podcast. We are so happy to have Drs. Allison McCulloch and Cyndi Edgington with us today to talk about supporting early career teachers with the discourse moves. Cyndi, will you start us off by introducing yourself? Tell us about your current role and the path that led you to the work you do today.
Sure. I'm Cyndi Edgington, and I started my career in education as a high school math teacher here in Wake County, and taught for about 8 years before I decided to take a break to spend time with my family. And really, during that time, really missed being in the classroom. So after some years, I decided to come back to school to get my master's. And eventually that turned into a PhD here at NC State. And I always joke that I just stuck around long enough that they thought, oh, well, we better give her a job. So I have been a faculty member in the College of Education at NC State since 2015. And my role here is working mostly with our pre-service teachers. I coordinate our undergraduate and MAT programs in math education. And I teach classes for undergraduate students and graduate students. And I work closely with our student teachers during their student teaching experience. So I think what led me to this work is really understanding how important discourse is in the classroom and how accessible it is for beginning teachers, and something that we can really focus on in our preparation of teachers that they can pick up and take and use as soon as they start in the classroom.
Allison, can you introduce yourself? Tell us about your current role and the path that led you to the work you're doing today.
Sure. My name is Allison McCulloch, and like Cyndi, I started, and I'm at UNC Charlotte, sorry, in the math department there. And like Cyndi, I started my career as a math teacher. I actually taught middle grades math for a year and then started teaching high school math and coached cross country and track while I did that and taught for about 12 years. And I'll be very honest, and when I started teaching, I felt very, very unprepared. I had come through a program where I was very strong mathematically, but very little as far as how do we actually teach this stuff? How do we engage with students? And as I got more experience, I started mentoring new teachers just in my role at the school, and eventually started leading professional development for the district and being invited to do some national things related to that. And felt like I was being put in places where I needed to learn more if I was going to do those things, but really wanted to do those things because I never wanted anybody to feel like I did again when I started teaching. So that's when I went back to school. I did a master's and then a few years later started in a PhD program. My PhD is in math education. Again, much like Cyndi, we've had very similar paths. So now I've been in North Carolina since 2007, working with mostly pre-service teachers. It's a lot of the work that I do. I'm currently the program director for both the undergraduate and graduate programs here at UNC Charlotte. I teach classes for pre-service teachers and for graduate students. So my time is kind of split between supporting new teachers and working with the graduate students who are wanting to study the teaching and learning of mathematics. So my time is split pretty evenly between the two. And I actually started working on this particular project, NC2ML, from day one, back in 2016. So I've been with this incredible group for a very, very, very long time and have seen the work continue to grow and change in really exciting ways. And yeah, that's why I'm here.
Yeah, this is a cool episode because both Allison and Cyndi have really been with us through this whole journey with NC2ML. So it's so cool to have that perspective and then also think about how they're using some of the resources that we've built together over the years in their own workspaces and their day jobs too, right? So it's really interesting. I'm excited about that conversation.
It's also cool for me because they've both been part of my education journey, becoming the educator I am today. From the very beginning, I had both of them guiding me and mentoring me. So I'm feeling pretty excited about hearing their expertise shared with all of y'all because I've gotten to benefit from it for a long time.
Yeah, I think it's pretty disappointing that Allison left out the whole I was at NC State for a really long time and just bypass that whole period because as we were talking pre-recording that we have 4 people from NC State on this one podcast. So go Wolfpack.
Go Pack.
You're not at NC State, you're missing out.
Wolfpack is me, but I'm a Wolfpack supporter, so I'm a fan.
That's what matters.
Right?
That's
Okay.
what's important. And thank y'all for having us. I a lot of times don't feel like the expert, especially in a room with the 4 of you. So I appreciate you inviting me to be a part of this.
You're
The
happy.
only thing I'm an expert at is shenanigans. That's the only thing I'm an expert at. But this episode is going to be a really, really good one. It's probably going to be most beneficial for coaches or math teacher educators and teacher leaders that may be mentoring our beginning teachers. The focus is around how we are supporting early career teachers in the classroom.
Can you talk to us about why developing new teachers is important to you and how you support them to develop their skills using mathematical discourse?
Sure. Yeah. So when I started working on my master's and PhD program, I had the opportunity to teach some undergraduate classes, and I just fell in love with working with pre-service teachers and really being able to be a part of their journey and watching them grow through their program and through their student teaching. And so that experience, coupled with my own experience teaching and really valuing the work that teachers do and having quality teachers in the classroom, it's just so important that we, number one, have encourage individuals to go into teaching and math teaching, and also to make sure that they have the tools that they need once they get in the classroom so that they can feel successful. I think Discourse, as I mentioned earlier, is just one of those tools that's not only super important, and we know that from the research, right? Like it's already been established that mathematical discourse is really important. It's really powerful. It impacts students' identities. It impacts their, learning in so many different ways. So we already know that. So we need teachers to be able to use discourse in their classrooms on a regular basis. And we need teachers to understand the power of discourse, and we need them to understand that it's not this huge, crazy thing that they need to implement in their classroom. It's something that they're probably already doing. And just thinking about a few tweaks or trying some different things or reorganizing their classroom in different ways can amplify the discourse that they're already doing in their classroom. And that it's not a scary thing. It's something that we can do, and it can be really, really powerful and impactful for our students.
I love that you threw an amplify there, as we were talking about amplifying student voices in this podcast.
I didn't do that on purpose, but yes, good connection.
We'll pay you afterwards, Cyndi.
Excellent.
Yeah. A nice plant there. Allison, what about you? Do you have anything to add?
I would just like to echo what Cyndi said. I just, as I mentioned earlier, I came to this work because I didn't feel prepared to do the work as an early career teacher. So making sure that early career and even pre-service teachers do feel prepared is just what I care about more than anything. I don't want anybody to feel like that. I think that one of the challenges we face here, so as Cyndi mentioned, that we know this is how important this is for teaching and learning. We know how important it is. However, in my experience, by the time a lot of pre-service teachers get to me during their final year before they go out to student teaching and go out and become early career teachers, they've had a lot of experience that are the exact opposite of what we hope they enact. Even if they had some great teachers in middle and high school, a lot of times their university experiences worked directly against that. And they step into that final year when they're starting to write lesson plans and so forth, and are emulating some of the practices that do not put discourse at the forefront, do not position students as thinkers and doers at all. And it's not because they haven't had those experiences. We've had more and more students lately that had those experiences in their past, but they're a little further in their past. So we have to remind them about what it's like to be a middle school or high school, especially high school student, and in a class that might be 90 minutes long. And what are you going to learn from watching somebody else do math for 90 minutes? The students need to be engaged in that. So not only is it super important that they understand the research behind it, but also getting them some experiences to remind them what it feels like to be in that situation and how empowering it is for them as learners, and then thinking about what that means for their own teaching and for the students in their classrooms.
If I can add on to that too, Allison. So I think it's a good point what you make about their experience in college level math courses maybe not matching their earlier experiences, or what we hope that they'll learn. But I think that students that go into wanting to become math teachers, they understand that something has to change, that if we keep doing the same things that we're doing, things are not going to change. And they know, okay, I have to do something different. And so I have found that they've been really open to the idea of trying something different and trying something new, and really paying attention when they're observing other teachers, really paying attention to, okay, what are these little things that the teacher's doing that are really engaging their students and encouraging them to talk about their ideas. So I think that beginning teachers, like, they want to try new things. They want to try different things. They want to figure out what is what works with my personality, what works with my teacher identity. And that's really exciting.
I completely agree with you. And sometimes it's just, what I was trying to point out was really just reminding them of what that felt like when they
Right.
had those experiences. But I 100% agree with you. They come in
Yeah.
knowing something has to change, knowing that they want to do something different than what they've been experiencing, even though they aren't quite sure how to do it yet, but
Yeah.
open and excited. Yeah, completely agree, Cyndi.
I think what's going to be great about us talking today is I know we've all been talking outside of this space around how less and less are coming through those traditional
Right.
and
Yeah.
district leaders are also starting to serve those roles as thinking about how to support early career teachers, some of them who did not go through a teacher prep service, right? And so we are also starting to think about how to help and support teachers as they're learning to make those things happen, right? And sometimes those are teachers who just got a math degree or got some sort of STEM degree and has decided they want to go teaching. But sometimes it's folks that haven't been in school for a while, right? And just have their school experience to lean on, not even thinking about their most recent undergraduate experience. And so I think that, yes, I agree with all of that. And I'm just thinking about how we can take some things and learn from each other from what we're doing in our pre-service prep programs and what we're doing at district levels to kind of support lateral entry teachers and some other non-traditional type pathways.
You both are involved in helping develop resources for the We All Speak Math campaign. Allison, could you share a bit about how you organize all those moves that we promote month to month in the campaign, and when you're designing for new teachers work with, what that looks like?
Yeah. Last year when we were, and this year when we are going month to month and highlighting a particular move each month, I would definitely encourage people to engage in that. We're going to take one bite at a time, try one new move at a time. But when I'm working with teachers, whether it's early career or in my courses, and we need to talk about them all, but we don't have all year to do it, I tend to group them together in certain ways. So I think the ones I usually start with are like inviting, revoicing, waiting, and encouraging and progress thinking. They all work very well together, and they're all about kind of, they go well with just setting up what we expect our discourse to look like in our classroom. I'm working on inviting you to take part in this. Revoicing is a move that is so easily done by myself as a teacher. Me revoicing or asking students to revoice. Waiting, I know I always need to work on waiting whenever I'm going to do these things. So we don't want to leave that out, because if we're making these moves and then jumping right in, we're kind of,
I'm so
working
bad at
against
that.
ourselves in that situation. But I think encouraging progress thinking for me goes right in there at the very beginning, because it's really important to let students know that I don't expect you to be done and perfect. Anytime I ask a question, we learn just as much or if not more, from engaging with your early thinking, and refining that thinking as we go. So I usually start with those four together. Advancing, and assessing, I tend to group together, especially like if we're in coursework or a longer PD that might be, in coursework, we use the Principles to Actions books as kind of the overarching framework for a lot of our programs. So the NCTM Principles to Actions and Taking Action books. And advancing and assessing are kind of the types of questions that are specifically called out in those materials. And using purposeful questions is one of the math teaching practices. So they go really well together with that. And then when we talk about those particular types of moves, bringing in encouraging and progress thinking again, continuing to bring those other moves in. Advancing and assessing works when you're with small groups just as well as a whole class. So it's, as we're thinking about how we're going to support students when they're working in small groups, it's a nice one to bring in at that particular moment. And going along with that is thinking about anticipating student thinking and planning some of those assessing and advancing questions ahead of time. So if you've got a class of, 25 to 30 students who are all working in small groups, you can move around the classroom a little bit more quickly if you have some sense of what you might see, and you don't have to, as you're making your 3,000 decisions in that class, some of those decisions are pre-made. So when you run into somebody who's done some strategy that you've never thought about, you need to really spend some time with them to understand their thinking, because it's something new. You've got the time there because you planned for everything else. So I kind of group those kind of things together. When we talk about facilitating whole class discussions, that's where I bring in attributing and orienting, because those are really important when you've got the whole class together, especially. Also useful in small groups, but I don't want to throw, I think Cyndi and I have had this conversation before, like we can't throw 9 moves at people at once. That's why part of the campaign from the beginning was 1 move a month. Yet at the same time, we know some of them work really well together. So if we don't have a full year and it's a smaller bit, which ones really do work well together in what situations? So that's kind of how we've been thinking about it. The one I teach separately is assigning competence. I pull that out and talk about it separately, its importance, and how it's different from all of the other moves. I think it deserves a lot of attention. And so I do pull that particular one and we work on that one separately from the others that we've kind of grouped together.
I think that a lot of educators across the state that see those moves last year when they came out month to month don't realize the thought and the work that went into just the order of the way that they came out. There's a lot of conversations amongst a lot of great people of what would be appropriate. So that gives a kind of a peek behind the curtain, if you will. It's really good. Cyndi, do you have any special considerations to reflect on when you're organizing how you introduce the moves?
Well, I failed to mention in my introduction that Allison was one of my mentors, professors. She was on my committee. So it's no surprise at all that I would repeat exactly what she just said. And I agree 100% about, the way that she talked about chunking them together. In my work, especially with pre-service teachers, I really have tried to think about like what is most accessible to them and what moves might be more challenging. So, once they get more comfortable with some of the earlier moves, then we can progress to some of the more challenging moves.
I've never put this connection together, but I was hearing it through both of you. It seems like it's modeled after the Launch, Explore, Discuss model. Like when you're talking about inviting and revoicing, those are almost really nice moves. Not that you don't use them in other spots. I'm not saying that, but like inviting kids into the conversation as we're thinking about launching, like getting out thoughts that they're not finished yet, right? With encouraging in progress thinking. And then you kind of moved into monitoring with assessing and advancing questions. And then you moved into the discussion with the orienting and attributing students math. And it was making me think about, I've been doing some coaching work with another one of our colleagues, Nick at UNCG. And we've been doing these decision protocols for our coaches in our district, where it's like, where's the first moment in the classroom that it went awry, right? And if it's the launch, you got to fix that first, because if you don't launch it well, then you're not going to have lots of different strategies to kind of think about when you're monitoring. And then if the launch went well and the monitoring, the kids are doing different things, and then it's the discussion that went awry, right? Like what's happening in the selecting and sequencing. And that's making me think about the moves too, right? Almost like a decision protocol of how to move people through learning those moves. I hadn't thought about it.
And even before that, Emily, right? Like what task are you giving to your students? So if my lesson plan is me standing at the board, writing examples, then and explaining what I'm doing to my students, then that's not providing many opportunities to do any of those things. But if I'm if I'm thinking about like giving them a task that has multiple approaches and different interpretations and all of that good stuff, then that's going to open up the door to allow for all of those things to happen more naturally.
Good point. And also a plug for the use of high quality instructional materials. I wouldn't
That's
be
right.
a director of math if I didn't put that plug in right now. Hi, thanks for listening today. Have you seen Mathematics Teacher, Learning and Teaching, or MTLT's latest issue? It's all about principles to action and celebrating the 10th anniversary of NCTM's publication that has been the catalyst for so much progress in math education in the last decade. And guess what? We have our own article. Check out October's issue of MTLT for an article from us around the We All Speak Math campaign and learn more about this movement that is making a difference for our schools in North Carolina.
Wow, that's such a nice segue to my next question, which is what kinds of activities have you found to be most productive as you engage your new teachers with these moves? Cyndi, we'll have you start us off.
I think principles to actions, as Allison mentioned, is a good starting point. And in our program, we also use the 5 practices for productive mathematics discussions. Giving them that sort of framework to start with, I think, is really helpful. Beginning teachers understanding the value of high quality tasks, using the 5 practices, things like productive struggle, questioning, those kinds of things. So once I have that foundation, things that I do with my beginning teachers, we just practice. I think it's really helpful to ask them to choose what is one move that you want to practice, that you want to focus on. So providing them the opportunity to choose what they want to work on, and then just think about that one thing. Just think about revoicing. Just think about assessing, whatever the move is that you want to focus on. Just think about that and think about instances where you're going to practice it. With classroom teachers, beginning teachers that are in the classroom, Monday, plan your lesson and where are the moments where you're going to practice whatever move it is that you want to think about. I'm going to stop and let Allison share because I can't think of other things right now, but that's, I think, a good place where we start.
And half of what I'm going to share are ideas that came from Cyndi that she just hasn't remembered. So similarly,
Contributing each other's thoughts to each other.
we used to have offices right next door to each other, and I really missed. We had a
I know.
between them.
Yeah.
One of the things that I found really helpful when we're not with students. So there's an aspect of practicing with students when we have those opportunities.
Right.
Pick a move, practice it, reflect on it, video record your teaching, watch yourself, and analyze that. So, the times that we can actually practice with students, whether it's micro teaching or in real classrooms, that's the most productive time. But when doing that, being intentional about, I'm going to really work on this and this today, and then analyzing afterwards, whether it's debriefing with somebody else that was in your classroom observing, or recording yourself and watching yourself and then reflecting on it, but getting that reflective piece in there as well. But just taking small chunks and working on those. When we're not in classrooms, I find using written vignettes to be really helpful. People ask for video all the time, and I love video, and we can analyze video too, but a written vignette allows us to go at a pace to really think hard about what kids are saying, what teachers are saying, what representation is sitting right there, and it doesn't fly by you as fast. So it makes it a little bit easier to not focus discussions almost. I really like vignettes. And I found there's vignettes in the Taking Action book. There's vignettes in the 5 Practices books. There's vignettes in Lana Horne's books. There's vignettes in, there's a book on teaching with technology that's got vignettes in it. So there's vignettes you can kind of find all over the place and repurpose them for this, because it's all talking going on in there. So you can look at them from different lenses. So I find written vignettes to be really helpful. I also really like doing rehearsals and role playing. So sometimes it's actually getting up and rehearsing as we're a whole class. Sometimes it's role playing in small groups. So for example, if we're trying to practice assessing and advancing questions, I might give somebody, you're going to be the student. Here's the task that you've been given. Here's the partial understanding you currently have that I want you to display as you're working. And the people role playing as teachers don't know what that is. And you're working with, imagine you're working in a small group, teacher walks up, They had a little bit of time to prepare, to anticipate student thinking and thinking about what questions they're going to ask to assess in advance. And they've got to walk over, engage with the student, assess their thinking, and then make a move to advance their thinking. So, little small group role playing like that is a great opportunity to practice.
Yeah, so I think the idea of starting with a small group is really helpful, Allison, because it's a more manageable sort of chunk than thinking about how am I going to have a discussion with 30 students. It's much easier to have a discussion with 3 or 4 students than it is with 30. So I think starting with small group is a really good way to kind of get into it. The other thing that I wanted to share that I have used recently is a program called Go React. And essentially you upload video to Go React, and then you can tag your video or other people can tag your video. And so that's been really helpful for having individuals record their instruction, upload it to this platform, and then they can think about, okay, here are examples of when I did this move, or here are times when I could have done this move. I didn't, but I could have. And so I think that's been really helpful too. So that's Go React, and it's a really great resource for reflecting on teaching.
We use Go React as well. And actually one of the assignments I do is one that I got from Cyndi, and it's towards the end of their semester when they have been out in classrooms and video recording themselves, and they upload part of our whole class discussion and go in and tag places where they use these different moves. Very, very simple thing to do, but it reinforces what moves did I use? What moves could I have used that I didn't? Where did I have opportunities there, and so forth. And using a program like that, you can do it independently. You can do it, and you can have students review each other's work and add onto each other's. That particular program is very expensive. There's also a free, somewhat similar program called Video Ant that is out of, I believe, University of Minnesota, that I've used when I've been working with teachers in the field where we don't have Go React. Our universities have paid for it, and it plugs into our Canvas system. So it's not really something we have to use outside of those situations, but something like Video Ant works really well for that as well.
Cool. I didn't know there was a free one. That's good to know.
Yeah.
I'm like over here furiously writing down technology tools that I need to be checking out to do professional learning as well. But what I heard through that too is making me think about like the design of professional learning that we do. And there's some research by Grossman and colleagues that's around like represent, decompose, and approximate the practice, right? And so several like examples of that when you all are talking, and I think
exactly what we're doing.
Yeah,
just in language, but that's exactly what is guiding the design of our work.
I think that's been helpful. I mean, that's a super researchy thing, right? But in my practice world, I'm back in now. It's been helpful for me when I'm designing professional learning to think about, okay, how am I going to represent it? I'm going to teach it. We have the NC2ML briefs, right? So you can pull some tasks from those, as a professional learning facilitator, what that looks like. So I can show that to my teachers, and then I can use those briefs to break it down, right? Like, let's read through this brief. Let's look at the sentence stems. Like, how are we decomposing that practice, and like what the result of the student said. And that's when the vignettes come super helpful, right? Like the vignettes or the transcripts. And I wanted to add a couple that I've used as a district leader. The 5 Practices in Practice book have lots of video clips, and they come with transcripts of the actual teaching. So just like literally going through and having participants highlight and like name what is that move that you just saw, and then look at what was the student move that came, like what happened because of that result. It's really great way to decompose. And then you kind of move into that rehearsal space where you're approximating practice, right? So I think all of those things are really interesting tools to think about how to do that 3-step process for teaching these.
If I can add one more to Emily, going back to your comment earlier about supporting new teachers that maybe have not been students in a long time, or they're career changers, or whatever the situation might be. I know when I was a beginning teacher, it was so valuable for me to just go observe other teachers. And I know that sometimes time is a challenge, but if coaches can find ways to support their beginning teachers to go observe other teachers. I just think that's a really powerful learning experience, and you can give them identify a teacher that does really well with discourse and ask a beginning teacher to go observe and to look for specific things. And I think that can be really helpful.
I'd like to add to that is sometimes the most valuable thing is to go observe a teacher that is not teaching math, because you're no longer focused on the math and you're watching more of the moves. And
That's
I know
a great point.
Get to the specific, the moves that are very specific mathematically, but it's a good step in. Because otherwise, especially as an early career teacher, if you're in somebody else's space watching them teach math, you're going to be very, very much focused on what's not necessarily the interactions, but how is that math being deconstructed? So sometimes it's helpful to be outside of the content to really pick up on some of the moves that can be made. It also gives you an opportunity maybe to see students you work with in a different setting.
Mm-hmm.
See how they engage in that setting, which can be really powerful as well.
I got to do that as a beginning teacher, and I got to go observe the dance teacher in my school, and I learned so much about classroom management from watching her class, and it was just like inspirational. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to go back to my classroom right now and empower my students more, because she had all these student roles built into her class and it was running so smoothly. And I was watching my students, like you said, who were in my math class, acting up and not really wanting to participate. And they were like leading the class and telling people what to do. And I was like, aha, now I know ways that I can empower those kids, and it was like transformational for me. So I agree.
I really like that seeing other teachers. But what Cyndi was saying earlier about beginning teacher, and I'm sorry, I know we already know the answer to this because we talk about this all the time off camera, but I think the answer to this is very, very powerful. So sometimes, especially when teachers are first starting out, or maybe if they're a veteran teacher and they're just now starting the discourse moves, it may not come out exactly as we intended. When you have something new and you try it out, it doesn't always work perfectly the first time around. If any of you have any advice to those new teachers or coaches or teacher leaders or anyone that supports those new teachers on what to do in those type of situations, failing with discourse moves.
One thing that I think is really nice about these moves is they can't really fail.
I'm sorry, can you do that again?
Yeah, I feel like these moves can't really fail. So they're small enough that it's not a huge lift to try. And when you might be struggling with them, it's not as noticeable that like a huge flop happened. So the failing tip often comes in with remembering to make a move. And that's where little things like the posters and the sentence starters can be helpful to the teacher as well. One of the resources that's on the website are these reminder bubbles that are for teachers. And those are to just put up in the back of the classroom. One of the teachers that was working with these requested this. I think it was somebody from your district, wasn't it, Josh?
It was someone from my district.
Yeah, that requested these. And it was like just a reminder to me that I could make these moves when I'm like frozen in time. The other thing I would point out, so I think that's really helpful. And I can't reiterate enough that what I love about these moves is they work in every single situation. Whether you're in small group or whole group or whatever the kind of task is, you can start engaging with students back and forth by using these moves. You might not feel great about your lesson, but I don't think you'll have a huge, oh my gosh, that flopped because of using discourse moves that sometimes people experience when they take a huge risk. So it just feels like a smaller risk in that way. The other thing I would always tell teachers when they feel like that's happened is to be honest with their students about it. Like, here's what I'm trying to do, and here's why it's important for both you and me that I'm doing this. Like, get them in on it.
Right.
Reflect with them on why maybe it didn't work today. I'm trying this new move out. It's called revoicing. Sometimes I'm going to revoice things. Sometimes I'm going to ask you to revoice things. here's why I'm doing it. Here's why it matters to you, the learner. Here's why it matters to me. And all I have to do is look at the toolkits, and it's got that written down right there to share with them. And I tried it today. It didn't work great. What could we have done differently? So getting them in on it and being honest with them, I think can go a long way. That says, I care about you as learner. I'm trying to, improve my practice to help you. Let's work on this together. The only other thing I mentioned, well, I always share my failures with them as well. I flop all the time.
Yeah.
It happens. I like to take risks and try something new, and inherent with that is sometimes it doesn't work. So I think as people that are working with, we learn from each other. So if you're supporting new teachers in any way, early career teachers, and stepping into that space, be honest with them about things how you've handled it in the past when you've had those situations, because we all have, and that can make a big difference. I'd also find out maybe why they felt that it failed, or if I'm sensing that they don't want to stick with it and try it another day, find out why. Because sometimes it's not something that happened in that classroom. It's more the perception of what they think somebody outside of that classroom might think. So APs are going to be walking through here, and if I try this and it's not working and they happen to walk through next week, that's going to reflect poorly on me. Or I really want to try this, but so-and-so who's in the building who might walk into my classroom really expects classrooms to be quiet. So it could be, lots of different things. And if it ends up it's something that it's not about them and their students in their classroom, then let's brainstorm what kind of things can we do to maybe facilitate, cross-role discussions and so forth. And I think that's something that's been built into these toolkits as well, is anticipate, all of these things. We should have the same expectations across all roles in the school to make our instruction flourish and our students flourish in the classroom. So if that's what's going on, pulling out those toolkits for administrators, where it talks about, for each one of those moves, here's why it matters for some of the broader goals in our school. Here's how it's connected to Portrait of a Graduate. Here's how it's connected to our assessments, our teacher assessment system, which will maybe give them a little more confidence on why it matters, but also gives talking points if it's about somebody else coming in and wondering what's going on.
We talk a lot about wanting to have a classroom culture that values mistakes for our students, mathematical mistakes, right? And so as teachers, we're always going to be, it's never going to be perfect. There are always going to be things that we try that don't work. There are always going to be mistakes that we make or things that don't work the way that we hoped they would. And to me, that's like part of the exciting thing of teaching, is that it's a kind of an experiment that we don't really know exactly how it's going to go. And that's exciting and fun. And you can be creative and you can, try different things and see what works, see what doesn't work. But the other thing that I wanted to add too was just really thinking through, what are the ways that I set up my classroom environment to start with that will support these kinds of things to happen throughout the school year. And that was really what we heard from a lot of teachers when we first were putting out the discourse moves. And so this year we developed a toolkit for creating a classroom culture that supports discourse. And there are 4 briefs. One of them is about setting expectations, and really, taking the time to think through, okay, what classroom agreements do I need to have? How do I want my classroom to be organized? What kinds of routines can I put in place that will support discourse?
I am loving these references to all of our great resources for everyone to go check out, and some of the reasoning behind why we built those resources. So thank you for sharing that. Before we close, we want to connect back to our campaign. When you hear the phrase, "we all speak math," what does that mean to you? And Allison, we'll start with you.
I think what I love about that phrase is it's not a suggestion. It says we do it. We do it already. So if we're putting it out there as a statewide campaign, okay, we do it, but we can do it better. So let's work on it together. So that when I see that phrase out there in this context, that's what it means to me is, hey, this isn't a suggestion. We're already doing it. So let's work on it together and do it better.
Yeah, I think for me, it's about recognizing that all of our students deserve to be in classrooms where their ideas are valued, where their ideas are listened to and heard, and where students feel like they have something to contribute. Because we know that they do. They might not always believe that they do, but we know that they do. So where they learn to value their ideas and know that their ideas are important and contribute to the learning of everyone in the classroom. And that's what I love about the campaign.
What she said.
Well, since we're running out of time, I want to thank you both for sharing your insights with us today. But before we go, Cyndi, how can listeners learn more about your research and how can they connect with you?
I am always accessible by email, and my email address is cpedging@ncsu.edu. And I'm happy to have conversations about ideas that, teachers are trying in their classrooms or research ideas or any of that good stuff.
Allison, what about you?
Contact me anytime via email, and my email is allison.mcculloch@charlotte.edu. I'm on all the socials in some capacity, including on LinkedIn, and I think I've been seeing a lot of our old MTVOS community over on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. I still hang out on X because I used to love just scrolling through and seeing the great things math teachers are doing in the morning. But yeah, contact me anytime.
Speaking of resources, and y'all have named a number of awesome resources that will be linked in our podcast notes for this episode. But are there any other particular resources that you would suggest our listeners check out this month as they're planning to use Discourse Moves?
This podcast. I've forwarded it to students that are early career out in the field. I've got students in my classes. I required some of these for them to listen to.
Yeah, same.
And then they go and do the readings that are suggested afterwards, and we have a discussion about them. These podcasts have been fabulous. So
Yeah.
the podcasts for sure. I think some of the older materials that have been created by NC2ML can also be really, really helpful here. For example, Cyndi mentioned creating that classroom culture around discourse. If you go to the middle grades, instructional frameworks, they've got a PD that was put out specifically about the first days of class, where there's a video of Michelle Steffen teaching her first day of school, where she is setting up these norms. And you will find almost every one of our discourse moves in that video, which is fabulous. So definitely all the discourse resources, but I would look at some of the others as well. I mentioned before that I really like to focus on assigning competence separately and very intentionally. And Alana Horn's book, Strength in Numbers, is a great resource for that. And I pull things from that. I pulled vignettes from that. I pulled chapters from that for folks to read.
This is a kind of an old article. It's from 2000, but it's called Never Say Anything a Kid Can Say by Stephen Reinhardt. And it's a short read and it's excellent. And it really talks about a lot of the same things that we are promoting through the Discourse Moves. I also second the podcast. My students are listening to the Beth Erbel-Eisenman and Emily podcast this week.
So flattered to and honored to be a part of something that is being used in so many different capacities for learning. And I really appreciate you all tuning in. And that's it for today. So thank you all for listening to our We All Speak Math podcast. We really are having a fantastic time making it and having these conversations. So thanks for joining us. Cyndi and Allison, thank you for joining us for this episode. It was wonderful to learn from you all today and to hear your insights on these discourse moves. So thanks so much
for having us. It was great to see y'all.
Thanks so much for having us and for doing this. This is a huge lift that you all have taken on, and from the entire community, thank you for doing this.